way off in the distance, but it looks like Cal's fighting a fish at the moment. Yep, he definitely has one on. So I still have my gear out, but we're gonna buzz on over and see if we can see what he's hooked into. Cruising, trying to catch up to him. Looks like a nice trout. Oh yeah, nice fish.
Hey Wes, I dropped down just a little bit deeper and got a bite right away, so maybe they're just a hair deeper than we thought.
5 minutes later and I was hooked up again.
No camera, I don't know how to film him, I'm a mess.
Just like that, and I had 2 rainbows in the cooler.
Wes Ward's hooked up. He was trolling some kind of minnow bait 10 feet deep on a downrigger. We spotted some fish breaking on the surface and he immediately hooked up. Oh yeah, look at that. Nice! Awesome, Wes!
It's the wrong kind, dude.
Was it bass?
Yeah.
That's cool though.
A few minutes later and Wes was hooked up again. This time it wasn't a bass. This footage was shot in Elmer's Cove, basically right behind the Collins Lake store. The cove was stuffed with shad and that rang the dinner bell for the lake's bass and trout.
Show me that trout, Wes.
That.
Oh, nice fish. Oh, I got one too.
Nice.
I just got one. All right, Wes Ward's hooked up again. He just caught a big old trout. He probably has another one. I just got hit and lost mine, and they are biting. Let me see if I can get past him here. Get an angle here. It's a trout. Oh, this side, Wes. Bite him on this side. I was all pedaling like crazy to get over here, and then you're like, I'm going over here.
It's a bass.
Is it a bass? Yeah. That's cool. What we're doing here is we're seeing all kinds of shad busting on the surface, and there's, you know, whatever kind of game fish are out here, they're mixed in with these shad. We're catching trout, we're catching bass. I wouldn't be surprised if we caught a crappie or something else, but there's just a sea of shad breaking here. That's a nice spotted bass.
Yep, nice spot.
Good deal. Yeah. Wes is pulling a little crankbait. I'm pulling spoons. And it is.
When I hooked this fish, trolling my Sling Blade and XL rig about 20 feet deep, I thought I was into a monster rainbow.
Woo! Turn out fine. So fun. What's a bass? Bass.
Nice one, though.
Yeah. Look at those big, beautiful rainbows. That's what trolling flies can do. You think trolling flies don't work? Well, think again. You need to grab a set of my trolling flies, get out on the water, and get ready to go big. Yes! Howdy folks, Cal Kellogg here. In the beginning of this video, I ran some footage from a couple years ago. You saw me catch a really nice bass on trout gear, and you saw Wes catch a really nice rainbow on trout gear. We're fishing in the same place, the same depth, basically the same presentation. So what goes? We were catching bass and trout at the same time. Well, that segues into the question I got the other day from an angler named Walter Gibbs. Walt asked me, got some of my spoons, and I guess he's been catching bass on them. He asked me, hey, Cal, if I want to catch trout, but I'm catching bass, am I in the wrong area? And the answer to that is most of the time, no. Remember, all the predators in most of our lakes, like Shasta, Folsom, Don Pedro, New Maloney, so on and so forth, they feed on bait fish. And the predominant forage at most of our lakes is either threadfin shad or pond smelt or both. And if you get into an area that's holding bait, you just don't know what you're going to catch. You could catch a channel cat while trolling for trout. You could catch trout. You could catch rainbows. You could catch kings, brown trout, spotted bass, largemouth bass, smallmouth bass. You might even catch a crappie out in open water. The fish are being attracted by the forage. They're looking for a meal. That's what they feed on most of the time. Certainly they eat other things too, but that is their primary forage. So wherever you find the bait, you're going to find all different sorts of predators. Got a good story that illustrates this. Paul Nealand and I, the publisher of the Fish Sniffer, we were up on Lake Shasta. It was springtime and we're out in a big Fish Sniffer boat. And hang on, here comes a car. I'm going to brake for a second. Well, it wasn't a car. It was a group of people on dirt bikes, so good for them. Looked like a family. They were out getting some air. But anyway, back to Lake Shasta. So Paul and I were out in the Fish Sniffer boat. We locate bait, and we can see hard marks, so we know there's predators feeding on the bait near one of the big islands in the main body at Shasta. And it was clear that the predators were pushing the bait up against the island, which was still, a pretty deep drop off there, and feeding on them. So I was already rigged up with a 6-inch sling blade and a blue and white hoochie, and Paul had some sort of spoon on. We skirted the outer edge of that bait, and I immediately hooked like a 2-pound king. Oh, okay. Well, those predators, they must be king salmon. So Paul, real quick, he puts on a Dodger and hoochie rig like I was running. We come back around. Paul hooks up 2.5 to 3 pound rainbow, and before he can net that fish, I hook up what turns out to be a 3.5, 4 pound salmon. I actually ended up being on the cover of the Fish Sniffer with that fish. So we land those fish, we come back around again. Paul hooks up again. This time it's like a 3 pound spotted bass. I hook up again. This time it's a rainbow that I lose right behind the boat. Come back one more time. Paul catches another spotted bass. I catch a rainbow, and we're off the bait. The moral of that story is that all those predators were there, and they were exploiting that bait that was trapped up against that island. And those marks we were seeing, it was a mixed school of predators. And I wouldn't be surprised if there was a channel catfish in that mix somewhere down there, maybe a crappie, a brown trout, who knows? The bait and the feeding activity was attracting predators from all directions, and they were going to make the most of it as long as they had that bait trapped along that bank. Once the bait disappeared, we continued trolling the area. The marks disappeared, the bait was gone, the predators were gone, the bite was gone, and we went on about our business. So the short answer is, if you're catching bass and you're in a reservoir situation, I can almost guarantee you there are trout around, there may be kings around, and no, you shouldn't leave. The one exception to that, and the one thing you have to consider, is water temperature. Now let's say it's midsummer, the water's 75 degrees, you're trolling 10 feet deep and you're catching bass after bass after bass. Well, the water is too warm for trout. If you want to get into trout or kings, you're going to need to get offshore a little bit and drop down in the water column. Now you may still catch bass out there because they prefer warm water, but they're very comfortable in water that's 50, 60 degrees, right where the trout, right where the kings prefer to be. So in that situation though, you want to get out and get your lures down into a temperature range that is more conducive to trout fishing. But my bottom line answer is, for most of the year, if you're catching bass, particularly spotted bass, those are open water fish. If you're catching those, you are on the right track to catching trout. Stay at it, and once you locate some bait, if you can locate some bait, what kind of predator you hook, it is largely a matter of, luck of the draw. And I can't count the amount of times that I've found mixed schools of landlocked kings rainbow trout and spotted bass at places like Shasta. It's usually your deeper lakes, Shasta, Don Pedro, stuff like that. Big open water lakes, big schools of bait, and predators that know what's up. Predators that know once they find a pot of bait that's under attack, they can exploit it. They can get a good meal out of the deal before the action disappears. And anglers, we need to be in the same mindset. When we find a situation like that, it's not going to last for an hour or 2 hours. It can most of the time. The bite window on that is very short. I'll close with another story that doesn't involve bass, but it illustrates what I'm talking about. Gina and I were out in one of my Duckworths. This is a few years ago at Shasta once again, and we were running out of the McLeod going back to Bridge Bay. And we hadn't been spotting much bait, but we caught some fish. Well, all of a sudden, right there where the channels come together, right above the I-5 bridge, I spot a big school of bait, and there's hard marks on it. I put the gear away, get the gear back out. Gina's steering the boat. She's bringing us back around. I locked the speed in at like 2.5. And I figured these fish are aggressively feeding. There hasn't been a lot of bait around, so they're going to be getting it on down there. Sure enough, I can't remember, we put out a silver horn spoon, a Johnson slim fish, and I think one other spoon. Can't remember what it was. The bottom line is, first pass, I think Gina caught a 23-inch rainbow. Next pass, she caught a 2 or 3 pound king. Next pass, she caught a 6-pound brown, and the bait is actually moving up at that point. When I was netting the brown, the water turned purple around the back of the boat, and that bait was right under the surface. We got the brown, we got a picture, we got the gear back in, lost the bait for a second. It kind of pushed up into a cove there in the McLeod Arm. We made a couple more passes. We landed another rainbow, we hooked a fish and lost it, and then we lost the bait, and it was over. So, if you're lucky enough to find fish actively feeding on bait, don't dilly-dally. That's a good term. You don't get to say that every day. Don't dilly-dally, Walt. Get after them and make the most of it while the sun shines, so to speak. Anyway, I hope that helps. I hope that answers your question. If you have more questions, put them down in the comments below. And if any of you guys have a question, please shoot me an email or put the question in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer them. I'm Kel Kellogg. I got to get home. It's Sunday morning right now. My wife is going to make me some pancakes, so I don't want to miss that. Anyhow, I'm signing off for now. I want to thank you guys for all the support. And if you are looking for some awesome trout gear, spoons, rods, reels, soft plastics, and more, go on over to the fishhuntshoot.com website and check out my store. Great gear, gear that I fish, gear that I believe in, and I pass it on to you guys at a very fair price. Anyway, have a wonderful day. Stay healthy, stay happy, stay safe, and I will catch you next time right here on YouTube. Thanks a lot, guys. Kel Kellogg signing off.